little bit about the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and Lewis, of course. And I know I made the phrase, or somebody, I don't know, I came up with this phrase from just conversations. I said, it's C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, double or nothing. As in, like, if it wasn't for one, we wouldn't have the other, because they influenced each other so much. So I don't know, what do you think about that whole, their friendship and the influence they had on the writings and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of I think a love-hate relationship between those guys. Hate is a bit strong, but
love
you know,
and dislike.
Yeah, they had a lot of mutual admiration and respect, I think, but also it seems that their personalities were different enough that they drove each other to distraction as well. Like a lot of friendships, like a lot of relationships, marriages, whatever. You are better together, but there are times you just want to reach out and strangle each other. So, so yeah, I think the careers of both, though, as you say, may not have played out like they did if they hadn't spurred each other on.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Like career-wise, writing-wise.
Yeah, I think in that respect, yeah, it's probably very true that that neither of them would have achieved what they achieved without the influence, the encouragement, even the criticism of the other.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about, like, Lewis probably wouldn't have come back to Christ if it wasn't for Tolkien, because it was Tolkien and Owen Barfield and some of the other guys in their group that, you know, led them to become, that kind of brought Lewis back into Christianity. And then also, I mean, you see, like, Lewis, didn't he, like, say, no, Tolkien, these are good, you gotta keep writing them, or something like that. He encouraged them to keep writing The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I think, you know, as far as Christianity and C.S. Lewis, only God knows what would have become of Clive, you know, without the influence of some of these Christians in Oxford. But certainly, when it came down to it, I mean, the Holy Spirit was obviously doing a work on C.S. Lewis. I feel like he veered into atheism because he thought it was trendy. He thought it was what you did as an intellectual. You know, you can't possibly be a academic seriously taken seriously by your peers and a Christian. And so he goes off into this atheism, and as he says in Mere Christianity, you know, after he's back in the fold, he explains all kinds of different things, and then just sums it up by saying, so atheism is too simple. And I like that. It's just so cut and dried. It's too simple. It doesn't really explain things. It doesn't really walk these roads far enough. Yeah, what was Tolkien's exact influence there? I don't know, other than it seems that when C.S. Lewis came back to faith, it was as a result, a direct result of a long and very deep and very challenging conversation that he had with John Tolkien and Owen Barfield.
John Ronald Rule, whatever his name is.
Exactly.
That's quite the name.
So it is.
I go by my initials too.
I think I would as well. So, you know, you say what you will, the Holy Spirit prepared C.S. Lewis, got him to the brink, and Barfield and Tolkien baptized him.
Yeah.
You know, so not literally, but figuratively, not literally.
Yeah.
But
and I know, like,
helped them over the edge.
Yeah. And like you said, like, their criticism too, because I've heard a rumor, it's not guaranteed that it's true, but I heard a rumor that Lewis decided to put a lamppost in Narnia just because Tolkien said, oh, that doesn't belong there. So one of the things, like the defining things, like you look around on Pinterest, all the tattoos people are getting in Narnia, is like, oh, I want a lamppost on my finger. Oh, I want a lamppost right here, or whatever. Because it's the most iconic thing you think of.
Sure.
A lot of people know that.
Yeah.
And he thought of it because, or he did it, you know, he was a little...
Just to goad Tolkien,
Yeah.
And that's probably, I mean, that sounds like him. I can't imagine Lewis liking to be told what to do. You never really, you know...
Maybe that's why I feel a connection with him.
I've read, what have I said, 20 of his books? Something like that. You never get the impression that he was dying to be told what to do by other people, and including the academic hierarchy of Oxford. I mean, he fell out with them. He never actually got to the level of fellow, or don, or whatever it was called, at Oxford because he was always on the outs with like the up and ups.
So was it like always being an adjunct professor and not being?
Yeah, he was never. He was voted on a couple of times for a full fellowship, I think they called it, at Oxford, and each time it was given to somebody else. And he was a famous writer and all this stuff, but he never really played the political games at Oxford that would get him what he wanted, which is why Cambridge offered him a kind of build your own teaching schedule and make it all of the stuff you love the best about medieval literature and
he actually,
mythology.
And he was actually a fellow there, right?
Yes, I believe he was full-fledged, everything for the last, 8 or 9 years of his career. Which is kind of like going from the Vikings to the Packers late in your career, but they offer you just this deal you can hardly turn down.
Yeah, I mean, like, Packers aren't as good as the Vikings.
Well, just that, here's your rival. You're going to teach for your rival.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
It's not something that was done very often, but Oxford hadn't been very good to Lewis. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Now, back to the influence of Tolkien on Lewis's Christianity. I do think that, my favorite book ever is A Severe Mercy. Sheldon Van Auken talks about...
We should talk about that at some point, too.
Yeah, well, and it fits right into this conversation. Obviously, Van Auken starts corresponding with Lewis. They become friends. They have lunch. They enjoy each other's company, each other's deep brains. But I think the same process that happened to Sheldon Van Auken and Davy happened to Lewis earlier, in that he goes to Oxford. He's this smarmy little arrogant atheist who thinks he's got the world by the tail, and he runs into people like Tolkien, who is categorically brilliant and a deeply, deeply devoted Catholic. Well, that just did not that did not fit into Lewis's, you can't be a higher level intellectual and a Christian schematic. Here's Tolkien, he's both. And he just immediately shatters that, along with Owen Barfield, along with Charles Williams, along with lots of these guys that, like Van Auken says, when we went to Oxford, within a couple of days, God orchestrated it so that we would meet 5 absolutely brilliant scholars studying theology, studying physics, studying all kinds of stuff, who loved Jesus, were not boring, and were absolutely beyond brilliant. So it just shatters that stereotype of the bumbling, I'll just believe whatever's easy. And as Lewis says later, atheism's not easy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I definitely want at some point to do a video talking about A Severe Mercy and their friendship and stuff, because that's like a whole other video. We'll go on that tangent. We won't get back.
That'd be pretty cool. But they had a similar experience in Christ.
Well, I know that's what I think is so cool. It's like how, like, we can pass on what we like. Lewis was being for Van Auken what he had needed and what he actually received. Kind of like the whole, I don't know.
I pass on
what I've received from the Lord.
Right. He received from Tolkien a dose of brilliant Christianity. He passes that on then to Van Auken, who passes it on to people like me through his book.
Yeah.
So, and it just keeps perpetuating, and hopefully I can do that. I don't know about the brilliance part, but hopefully, you can do that for people coming along behind you, and so on and so forth, right down through the generations. So it's a beautiful thing that God, I love again, we can get into this more and even read passages and stuff in some other video, but I love when Lewis says in a letter to Van Auken, but I think the Holy Spirit already has you in his net. I don't think you shall get away. And Van Auken's like, I don't like the sound of that. I'm trapped. But it just speaks to how the Holy Spirit, he draws. He doesn't. The net analogy doesn't really work, because he won't take you by force, but he will draw you along.
Yes.
It's almost like, before the fish are actually scooped up in the net, they're drawn along by
the hooks. He's got
by the net is kind of pulling them in a certain direction. But he's never going to cinch it up. He's going to let it
you decide to jump in the boat.
Be up to you. Do you really want in or not?
Yeah.
So, anyway.
But and I don't know. But that's so cool. I love seeing the the relationship and their friendship is just, the love-hate relationship, because they fight
kind of like brothers. You
That's
know?
what I was gonna say too. And like how.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's apparently a rumor that one of the influences of Professor Kirk, like Professor Kirk's character, was Tolkien.
Sure.
And then I don't know if it's like that tree that is carrying like Pippin and Merry around or whatever it is, but apparently that tree is based on C.S. Lewis or something like that. And I just get this imagine, and there's like something online that said, I just imagine how this conversation went. So I based a character in Narnia on you. Really? Which character? Oh, the man who builds a wardrobe that leads to Narnia. And then Tolkien's like, oh, I based a character on you too. C.S. Lewis speaking. Oh, really? Well, what character? A tree. Or something.
A tree that carries around. Yeah.
A really cool tree, though. Or something like that. Like, oh, that would
be. A tree that whoops some butt. I
think it's. I don't know which. I think it's that tree because it's the only tree that like has a personality. But it's just kind of funny to me.
So it's kind of funny, you know, that Tolkien's professional, his Christian influence on Lewis was huge, pivotal, because Lewis comes back to faith. He writes the Screwtape Letters. He establishes his name as an apologist and a brilliant writer of theology, even through a goofy book like the Screwtape Letters, which is, you know, the whole backwards look at how spiritual warfare works. But professionally, yeah, I think Lewis in his writing irritated Tolkien to no end. Tolkien was such a purist that, you know, when it came to Lewis, he just couldn't even. It's like I can't even bear to look at your books because they're so full of intertwining mythologies and garbage that doesn't belong together. And which of the books did he not even read? He couldn't even read it. Was it The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? He couldn't even finish it because he was so bothered by
well, I did.
You know, the mixing and mingling of here's Father Time, oh, here's a witch, here's a lamppost, here's.
Yeah, well, I know I was trying to explain to my parents. Now that I've been getting into Lord of the Rings, I'm trying to explain the difference between the two, and I said, I think the way I describe the difference, because they both built worlds. Tolkien built a world from scratch, completely, like even the language. I think he wrote the language first and then decided to write a story about it.
Elvish.
And he did all, and he created,
unbelievable.
Yeah, the elves are there, but the elves, like, he didn't create elves, but they're not, they're not Santa's elves. They're a unique kind of elf, and the dwarves are unique, and all these characters, like hobbits, are completely different. And I said, I think Lewis came up with a world and just stuffed it full of things that he loved.
Yeah, I think it's like a chef. Maybe Tolkien would be like the snobbish chef who's got he has to make everything from scratch, and not only that, he's got to like create the dish.
Come up with a new recipe.
He's got to infuse it with his own flavors and spices and all this stuff. Whereas Lewis, he's working with a really dandy cookbook. You know, somebody else's ideas. He puts his own spin on it. But a lot of it was already established. Now, Tolkien would come along and say, yeah, but you mix these two recipes together. Yeah. Gross. And C.S. Lewis is like, well, taste it, buddy. And he's like, I can't even eat this.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's like two things that you can mix, like, whatever. I just think that's true. And, like, I remember hearing, and I don't know if this is true, I hope it's not, but they fought so much. One of the biggest things that made Tolkien so mad was Lewis is like, yeah, Father Christmas is in there. And Tolkien apparently just had a connection, and they almost like stopped talking or something like that.
Basically had an instantaneous ulcer because of it. Now, working the other way, I don't know about Lewis's influence on Tolkien's Christianity. I think Tolkien's influence on Lewis was lifelong as far as Christianity, because Lewis always bent toward Catholicism.
Yeah,
and I don't know if that's in deference to Tolkien or if he really just believed that Catholic theology was the best. It was the most consistent. I know that when Van Auken converts to Catholicism late in his life, he says that these guys have had the most consistent, all the way back to the beginning, and the Apostle Peter, the most consistent witness of.
Apostle Peter's the first pope?
So they say. I mean, they didn't have any of that terminology then, but yeah, they considered him the first of the popes. So, but it's been congruent all that time, whereas, you know, Protestantism is only 500 years old. However,
Are we Protestants?
We're Protestant.
Okay.
We say Protestantism was born out of a time when the Catholic Church had lost its way, substantially.
Yeah.
So that a person like Martin Luther comes along and says, no,
Well,
the indulgences, the manipulation, all this stuff, no. It's not about all the icons, all the saints, all the symbols and the almost, it feels like, to a Protestant, it feels like idolatry, all the stuff that we're worshiping, all the, you get mixed up in all this other stuff. No, it's and that's why he outlines it's by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And anyway.
Yeah.
That's getting down a whole different rabbit trail. But,
yeah. If we had more time, we could go down that rabbit trail.
We could, but Lewis's influence on Tolkien professionally was profound, and you were getting at that earlier. Was there anything you wanted to add to what you were saying?
Well, I was just going to say, like, I think this is something I learned from you, too. Like, Lewis, like, Tolkien was a perfectionist, and he was, like, he'd probably,
extreme.
He'd get stuck. He'd be like, I don't know if this is good. I don't even want to finish it. Because it took him, like, 15 years to write the books. Was it all three or just the first one? I think it was all three, and then I think I heard, again, just reading about the movies or something, the only reason they released this in, like, Fellowship, Two Towers, Return of the King was because of, like, a paper shortage or something. Like, I don't know what it was, but maybe it was The Hobbit or whatever.
Instead of as one volume.
Yeah. So, but because Lewis would, like, read the chapters and say, no, this is really good, you need to keep writing this, Like, he was kind of like, the friend that's like, maybe he was his Samwise Gamgee or something.
Right. I've heard it described in terms of Tolkien created in the Lord of the Rings trilogy one of the finest masterpieces of the 20th century. Generally, literary critic-wise, considered one of the great series of books ever written. Lewis, nothing Lewis ever wrote approached the greatness of the Lord of the Rings in the mind of a literary critic.
No, it's like, as kids, it's like the best books ever.
Say what you will about Narnia or any of his other books, Mere Christianity, any of the famous ones. Say what you will. When you're stacking up, the 1,000 greatest books of all time, Tolkien's his trilogy is gonna be way up there, and I don't know where some of Lewis's works would fall, but without the encouragement and influence and ongoing just critical help and push in the right direction of C.S. Lewis, Tolkien may never have finished those books because, he was a purist of the highest order. He would get literarily constipated, if you will. He needed somebody to come along and be like, this can happen, this can be produced. It is so rich and good. You have to keep going. You can't quit.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis was that person for him.
Yeah.
So.
I remember, like, I don't think I ever finished. I know I read the whole The Hobbit in school, and I think I started The Lord of the Rings, but they're just such big books too. They're kind of overwhelming to read, but as much as I love to read. And I remember, like reading and just being captivated, like by these vivid descriptions he gives, like, and you can tell in the movie, like the influence it's had, like how he's looked, and like people who make the Narnia movies are like, well, we could change some things, and it didn't matter because Lewis left a lot up to our imagination or something like that. And I always, when I like picture the two of them, I was thinking about, like, in preparation for this video, I was thinking, how do you describe their different styles? Because they're both great. Tolkien, I kind of picture him standing in front of, like, a bunch of literary students, lecturing and explaining this and telling them the story. And then, I am a lover of literature, so it wouldn't bother me. And then when I picture Lewis, I kind of am like, oh, he got the big armchair by the fire, and then he's got his grandkids. Well, he never had grandkids, but they're all sitting on his knees, and he's telling them a story. And I'm like, I wish they could have not killed each other. I'm sure they would kill each other if they tried to do it, but I wish they could have written a book together, because then you would have had, like, this beautiful, like, maturity to the writing combined with, like, this. I don't know if you combine it, but, like, the simple storytelling. Because Lewis is I don't know, I think Lewis tapped into a storytelling that maybe Tolkien didn't have.
He's a master storyteller. There are books that are driven by plot, and there are books that are driven by character. Well, Tolkien actually happens to write an epic that is driven by both. There's a great plot going on as they march the ring toward Mordor, but there's also all these great characters that are complex and. Think of the complexity of Gollum.
Oh yeah.
Here's this like schizophrenic. He's like a split personality freak, really.
Yeah.
And yet, as Gandalf says, I think in the book, I think they lifted this word for word. But you know, basically something tells me that there is still something in store for Gollum. He still has a role to play, and of course you haven't seen how that plays out
Don't
yet.
you dare tell me. I mean, I did tell my dad. I said he apparently knows how the Lord of the Rings ended because his buddy told me I school. I said, "Don't you dare!
Don't even think about it.
Don't you dare tell me."
It's like reading the last page of a book before you know, whatever.
Yeah, I said, "Don't you dare tell me."
But yeah, you have Tolkien who just, if he was a painter, he would be a realist, right? He would paint these trompe-l'oeil. I don't know how you say that, but there's the French style where you look at it and you can't even tell. You look at it and you go, "Is that a photograph? Oh, it's a painting." It's that realistic.
That's pretty. I mean, I like this.
It's pretty, and it takes phenomenal, flawless, painstaking talent to do it. That's Tolkien. Lewis creates something more like Monet. It's impressionist, it's glorious, but sure, it leaves a lot up to the imagination.
Yeah.
But you can love both.
And I mean,
it's just difference of personality.
As much as I love like Lewis's characters, I mean, they're not as multifaceted as like Tolkien's or something. I would say like that too.
Yeah, I mean, he just took more time, was more detailed. You know, the whole Lord of the Rings concept came out of a let's race to write a trilogy. Well, C.S. Lewis writes it in like no time at all. His space trilogy.
Oh, okay.
You know, starting with Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and then That Hideous Strength. I mean, he's done in like a couple of years. Meanwhile, Tolkien takes 15 years to write the 3 books. I mean,
but I mean, you can tell because it's so. And I mean, Peter Jackson kind of took that approach because, like I was watching some of the behind the scenes stuff, but like the first 2 movies, I will not have anything to do with Return of the King until I see the movie. But I was looking at it and I'm like, yeah, I was looking at it and I'm like, but you're like the detail he went into and like the studying and his wife co-wrote the movie, right? With him?
She was heavily involved, Fran Walsh, is that her name?
I think so.
I know there are scenes she directed, and yeah, she was heavily involved.
Yeah.
So I think in the writing and in some of the filming.
Yeah.
So
but it's like, but yeah.
Just... But I mean, these two were oil and water in some ways, and yet does C.S. Lewis come to Christianity as early and as forcefully without Tolkien? Probably not. Does Tolkien get the Lord of the Rings trilogy? We may not even be talking about Tolkien if it wasn't for Lewis. I mean, you got The Hobbit. I don't know. Standing by itself, would The Hobbit make Tolkien a household name like he is? I don't know.
I mean, The Hobbit's okay. Lord of the Rings is better.
But it just, so it's interesting to think, like, is there anybody in life who I will be anything like that for? I think of my friend Tim. Again, oil and water in some ways, our belief systems.
Because he's an atheist.
Well, no. I mean, no, he's not. He's just. I don't know how I would classify Tim.
I can't remember which one.
Hopeful agnostic. let's just say that. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I mean, Tim is. He's one of these categorically brilliant people, who I think at times I can maybe have with his work interjected something helpful. Not very often, but
is he a writer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Writer.
Wonderfully talented.
Okay.
Excellent writer. Excellent musician, and I feel like I'm not in a C.S. Lewis position. I feel like I'm a collaborator. Like I'm good at coming alongside something somebody else has produced and making it better. I'm not good at creating. Not really. My writing, my poetry, my music. I've never really tried to write music, but sometimes you're in the collaboration thing. Sometimes you're in the critic's role. Sometimes you're in the creation mode. All are good, and everybody needs a Tolkien to be like, no, this is absolute rubbish, or a Lewis to be like, you need to keep going. Don't get all bound up. Get some Metamucil. Get it out of your system. Produce.
You're visual.
It's a bad analogy. I readily admit it. But anyway, they just happen to be the right kind of wrong for each other, or something to goad each other in the right direction.
Well,
they both were what the other person needed, even though it wasn't like this. Everything's roses and whatever.
What's kind of funny is, I mean, at the end of Two Towers, I mean, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but you kind of think about it, like, Sam is like, someday they'll tell stories of us, Mr. Frodo. I won't say Mr. Frodo or something, and then Frodo says, how does he say it? He says, well, you're forgetting one character, Samwise the Brave, and Frodo wouldn't have gotten far without Sam, or something like that. Yeah. Sam thinks Frodo's joking, and Frodo's like, no, Frodo wouldn't be where he was without Sam. Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like, I mean, I don't know, I don't think they fought like brothers. You really only see Sam's like absolute devotion to Frodo, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, or you see like, maybe Legolas and Gimli, that's a good example too, like that.
They spur each other on.
They hate each other sometimes.
To produce stuff, and they annoy each other all along the way.
Yeah, like what is it, the line?
But in the end...
Well, should I describe it to you, or should I get you a box?
Yeah.
That's a great line.
Oh. So, yeah, do they produce as much? Do they end up doing as much good without the other? Probably not. All these characters in the books, or you think of your own life, who are the people who have given you a steady or a helpful bing in the right direction at certain times. We all need those people. So
yeah, it can take different forms. It can be like, hey, I love you. Now you can do this. You're great. Or it could be, you're being an idiot.
It can be abrasive. It can be loving. Sometimes both.
Yeah, it can be abrasively loving. It can be, I'm doing this because I'm being abrasive because I love you.
Yeah.
Or it can be,
I'm only kicking you out of the house because I love you. I mean, parents have to do that sometimes.
Yeah, like
to a 28-year-old kid who just can't get their wheels.
Who only play,
some traction.
Whereas like,
or whatever.
You have a month to get you have 2 weeks to get a job, or we're cutting you off money or something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, all of these are hypotheticals. Who knows what would have happened to Lewis's faith, Tolkien's literary career? I just know, you boil down your acknowledgments. I just read a book by Leif Anger, very character-driven. Not a lot of discernible plot running through the book, but wonderful characters, interesting people, beautiful writing. And in the end, he boils down his acknowledgments to a few statements, and he says something about his copy editor, like, thank you to the unparalleled blah, 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 whoever she is. A good copy editor is there to save you from yourself. And I think that's what Lewis does for Tolkien. And he helped to save him from himself. Like, at some point you just have to be done with some of this stuff and.
Like everything isn't going to be perfect or whatever.
You could revise a million more times and leave it a manuscript forever. How sad would that have been? And I'm sure it's happened with other books that we don't know about that would have been classics.
Yeah.
Well, that's a sad thought.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Like, are there other other classics that might be out there, authors that might have been.
If there would have been a C.S. Lewis to be like, bang, get it going, man.
Yeah. Or
so, I don't know.
Give you a kick in the pants.
Yep. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yep.